I know I'm a few days late in getting around to this, but I feel like I absolutely have to talk about Dunkirk. And I think probably the most important place to start when talking about this movie is with its director, Christopher Nolan. Now, over the last decade and a half or so, Christopher Nolan has carved out a reputation for himself as one of the most talented and one of the most accomplished directors in all of the business. He obviously rose to pretty prominent fame with Memento in the early 2000s, carrying on to Batman Begins and the rest of the Dark Knight trilogy, which pretty much goes down as one of the best trilogies ever, and I think in a lot of people's minds, some of the quintessential superhero movies ever. And you go on from there to direct something like Inception, which both visually and storytelling wise was very, very bold and risk-taking, but also very good. And after that, Interstellar, again, taking some risks, but still a very solid movie. So if a guy like Christopher Nolan comes to the people at a movie studio that are putting up the funds to make a big budget blockbuster movie, they're going to tend to take his word for it when he says that he's got some ideas and wants to take some risks, and they're going to give him free rein to do so. Dunkirk is a movie that, without a doubt, took a fair amount of risks and aimed to try a few things within filmmaking that are maybe a little bit unconventional and different from the norm. And the finished product in my book, it's just kind of so-so. That's not to say that it's necessarily a bad movie, because there are a small handful of things that Dunkirk does exceptionally well. But there are just as many, if not more things, where in my opinion, it just ended up feeling lacking. In getting into the good and bad of things, let's start off with the things that I really liked. First and foremost is that this movie is absolutely beautifully shot. You can see that Christopher Nolan still has it in the regards of setting scenes, of panning shots that sort of create this situation, and you see everything involved. All of it pulls you in and makes you somewhat engaged in what's going on within the situation, even if some of the times you're not entirely sure what exactly is going on. But the movie itself is absolutely gorgeous. Along with that, the action scenes in this movie, a handful of them are very tense and very well done. Not in the sense that they are overly done, but they feel genuine. They feel like something that might actually happen in a situation like this in World War II. It's not this barrage of heavy fire out of nowhere and then these guys gotta go hide, but sometimes it's in small increments where they have time to improvise because the enemy's still approaching, and they react in ways that seem somewhat rational for the sake of their own survival. Those bits of action I thought were great because you almost feel the struggle of these soldiers as they're getting into these situations they're in this absolute struggle of life or death to survive with all the odds against them. And those two aspects of a movie being gorgeously shot and those action scenes work really well hand in hand in many places. One thing that really stood out to me is you have an instance where there's a boat sinking and the camera work comes in and it has that kind of sideways pan with water flowing up above the lens that gives you the sense of where that boat's going. And you see soldiers struggling to go to a ladder that's on this boat that's sinking, because naturally your mind thinks ladder is going up, but as the boat tips over, so does the ladder, and they fight for this ladder, but it's not going anywhere. And the angles of the camera I felt were amazing in pulling you in and kind of seeing that struggle from the soldier's perspective, but also your mind just naturally thinks, yeah, ladder, go and climb that and you'll have more time. I also thought there was a very good contrast between sort of the desolation and hopelessness of these soldiers on the beach versus when they think they're headed to safety and they're finally feeling comfortable, of kind of conveying those two scenes. One is very bland, there's so much space and you just kind of feel the coldness and the emptiness, and on the other side of that you feel the opposite of that. Whether or not those situations actually stay put is part of what makes the movie tense, but I thought that contrast was also very well done. Giving credit to those few aspects that I felt were absolutely outstanding in this film, let's move on to where I felt it was really held back by pretty much everything else. The story of Dunkirk is practically non-existent. Characters within Dunkirk are practically non-existent. These are two crucial aspects of a movie that I felt Christopher Nolan has always really done well with that just felt entirely lacking. Now, a friend of mine made the reference that with a war movie like this, to try and convey the aspect that no soldier is particularly a standout, that every soldier is the everyman, and each one of them is on their own, so none of them in the context of war and hundreds of thousands of people on a beach should really be a standout. it just didn't really feel that way, and if that's what they were going for, they fell short. That's not to say that there aren't particular characters that they don't focus on throughout the film, because there are, just none of them really have a chance to ever develop or have you get to know them or see any kind of arc throughout the movie. There's a few actors, somewhat high profile ones, that are in here that never have a chance to really thrive because they're never really given a character to play. Their acting performances were fine enough, I guess, but they didn't seem like they were challenged to really be anything other than just kind of there. This is maybe a tiny spoiler, though it's tough to really spoil something that I feel doesn't have much of a story anyway, but of the small handful of characters that the movie sort of does focus and follow throughout the film, there's one that is pretty much in there the most. He probably gets the most screen time throughout the entire movie, and the whole time you're thinking, what's this character going to do? He's pretty quiet, he doesn't seem to be active in anything, and you're thinking that there's gotta be some payoff somewhere, and there isn't. He's just there and he doesn't do anything the whole movie, and I have no idea what the point of it was. And with this overall lack of characters, it makes you sort of look back at the action scenes of this movie, good as they were, and feel like they could have been a lot better if we actually cared about the characters and their own struggle in the situations at hand, but they never gave us that. And it's impressive that they still pulled off to have good action scenes, but they could have been a lot more. Another thing going along with that is the score of the movie. It feels like it should have been pretty good. It was done by Hans Zimmer, who is pretty much never a letdown, but again, the situations within the movie, the story that pretty much wasn't there, it doesn't really pull you in. It doesn't allow the score to pull you into the situations because you're not entirely sure what exactly the situation is. And the main reason for that is that this movie uses a multiple timeline type of build-up to everything. We have one group of people that are basically a week out from the final climactic event, one who's an hour out, and another who is 1 day out. But it jumps back and forth between all the timelines, and it doesn't do so in a very smooth way to where you generally feel lost as to what exactly is going on until about 2/3 through the movie, when you recognize something that appeared previously in another person's timeline, and you start to kind of get on board with where it's eventually leading to. But all in all, it was a bold risk to take, and I don't think it was done well at all in that respect, because it kind of detaches you from what's going on in each individual moment, because you don't know how the next scene that they just jumped to relates to everything that you just saw. I know I say about a lot of movies that I might not have been on the edge of my seat the entire time, but that I was never bored. With Dunkirk, I felt myself a handful of times thinking, where the hell is this going? Can we get on with it already? And that is maybe one of the most telling signs of how detached I was from the story, or the lack thereof, I guess. In the end, like I said before, Dunkirk to me is one of the most hit and miss movies that I can remember in a long time. It hits very well on one end of the spectrum, where it does a couple things absolutely exceptionally, and then goes on the other end of the spectrum to leave a story and character development that pretty much was non-existent in my book, to where the best I felt I could have given Dunkirk, even for how great some aspects of it were, was like a 6 out of 10 at best. And for people that liked it a lot less than that, I can totally understand. I have to be honest that I don't know how it's getting the high Rotten Tomatoes score that it is, other than maybe some people falling in love with just how good those positive aspects were. For me though, the negatives just pulled me out of it way too much, to where I have no desire to see it again, and if people were asking me if they should go see it, probably not going to miss much. But anyway, those are just my personal thoughts on Dunkirk. I would be curious to know what other people thought about this movie, if you felt it was lacking in certain ways, or if you felt there was something you saw in it that I maybe missed. But overall, I just felt detached from it for the most part. But whatever thoughts you have, feel free to leave them in the comments below. You know, the like button thing that I always appreciate, you can do that and I'll appreciate it. But above all else, everybody, thank you so much for watching.